today we have the great honor of having with us today Dr. Chris Barrigar, who will be speaking on God's agape, many roots design for the universe. So let me introduce Chris. So he's a pastor of the Church of St. Mark and St. Peter in Montreal, Canada. He holds a PhD in philosophy from McGill University, and Chris has taught and supervised at the graduate level and is or has been a member of various academic societies, including the Society of Christian Philosophers and the Canadian Society for the History and Philosophy of Science. Chris also serves as a subject area review editor for books in Bible, theology, and science, for the essays General Perspectives in Science and Christian Faith, and he is a member of the Montreal chapter of the CSCA. So with that, Chris, thank you so much for your time tonight. We're looking forward to hearing from you and learning from you. So I shall hand over the virtual mic to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nash, and it's a joy to be with you all this evening. So the initial model of, or version of what I'll be presenting tonight initially was published in 2017 as Chapter 2 in my book, Freedom All the Way Up, God and the Meaning of Life in a Scientific Age. And after the book came out, I did a book tour from coast to coast, basically, from University of British Columbia to MIT, and about a dozen campuses across North America. My very second, my second or third presentation on the book tour was actually originally to the Waterloo group. And so Robert Mann at the time arranged for me to speak, and I really appreciated that. And part of what came out of that tour, the book tour, was engagement with lots of scientists against who I could test my proposal, because I'm not a scientist, I'm a philosopher. And so I've had to learn my way around the world of science over the years. And so that book tour was a tremendous opportunity to test my proposals. I then, coming out of my MIT lecture, I then worked with Randy Isaac. Randy Isaac is kind of the patron saint, let's say, of the ASA. And Randy worked with me to revise parts of the proposal and to update it as an article that later appeared in September 2018 of PSCF. Since that article appeared, I've continued to update and revise and improve, continue to get feedback from scientific community, from scientists across lots of different spectra and disciplines. And so this is kind of where this is at today. So the AMR account, the Agape Many Roots account, is, I see it as an alternative to two other theories out there in the world. One is materialism, which is basically atheism, only the material world exists. And the other is to intelligent design, namely the intelligent design movement associated with the Discovery Institute in the States. And so, unlike the intelligent design movement and its theories, the AMR account incorporates mainstream evolutionary science. So the part of the background to why I developed this proposal is because as I engaged in discussions on science and faith with Christian scientists in the who are Christian believers, and of a doctrinally orthodox and theologically conservative position, world theology view, nonetheless, they're saying, what I see in the lab or what I see in research, my research does not line up with ID. And so there's this need for a way of integrating Christian faith, historic, traditional, Orthodox, biblical, Trinitarian Christian faith with mainstream science today. And so that's basically where this theory comes from. So what I bring to this is my ability as a philosopher to work with ideas of coherence. How do things cohere with across disciplines? So that's the origins of this. So I don't know if any of you this evening are supporters of ID. If you are, that's great, and we can have some interesting conversation. This my presentation is text heavy. Now, if you go to scientific presentations, they usually have lots of pretty pictures. I don't know, photos of a cell or an event display from an accelerator or something. I'm afraid I have zero pretty pictures in this presentation, so it's quite text heavy. I haven't found a better way to do it, and so I just ask your patience with that, and hopefully that text heaviness will actually serve a purpose by the end of this, to keep the ideas together. People often feel kind of lost about, I don't know, halfway through this presentation. And that's because I bring together a lot of different material from a lot of different directions. I've got a promise for you, and that's at the end, last few minutes, it'll all come together and make sense. So if you're feeling kind of lost halfway through, hold on, persevere, and it will come together. So let's begin. Trying to address two problems. How should we understand the divine purpose for creation? Then how should we understand the divine method of creation to achieve that purpose? So there's a purpose question and there's a method question. Furthermore, how should we resolve these two conceptual problems, bringing together both scripture and contemporary science? And so I'm making some presumptions there that scripture and contemporary science can be brought together in a way that solves both the purpose question and the method question, or at least makes progress on those questions. Only God can really solve them, but I do believe we can make progress. So let's first talk about the purpose problem. How to identify God's purpose in creation. And I'm going to present a number of theological premises along the way. So here's premise number one. That God's purpose in creation arises from God's trinitarian character or essence of agape-love. Now, that may seem like a truism, like, how else would God's purpose arise other than God's character? But actually, in much of theology, including ID, and much of theology of creation and integrating science and faith and so forth, God's purpose is often left disconnected, undiscussed, let alone how creation reflects God's own character, let alone God's character is of agape-love. And so that's a theological premise for me to begin this project. So now, if that's the premise, that this has to reflect God's agape-love, well, then we have to ask, okay, well, then what is agape-love? And so we learn from Emmanuel, God with us in Jesus of Nazareth, what that agape-love is. And here's, as I look at scripture and try to pull together the teaching of the New Testament, here's the definition I derive of agape-love as self-sacrificial, self-giving. I'm going to stop right there for a moment before I go on. Self-giving is always self-sacrificial. But I've actually built in the redundancy there intentionally, just to remind us that self-giving it does involve sacrifice for us. Those words self-giving can just kind of roll off the tongue too easily. We don't really capture the depth of it. So I'm being redundant there to try to capture the sense of the depth of the self-sacrificialness that is involved at the root of agape-love. So let me carry on. Self-sacrificial, self-giving, to bless God and to benefit others, especially those who are vulnerable, as well as strangers and enemies. So I don't know how many of you, if any of you are follow discussions in evolutionary psychology around altruism. There's some interesting implications here for that discussion. And if anyone's interested in that, we can get into some of that. But I'll leave that to the side for now. So for now, here's the definition of agape love that I will be working with and using. So we come to theological premise number 2. Agape love requires genuine free will, not just the appearance of free will, in order to be able to freely choose actions and relationships of agape love. If you're at all familiar with discussions of free will today, you'll know that in neuroscience, in philosophy, and theology, the existence of free will is very controversial, ancient controversy, continues today. We can get into that later if you wish. For now, I'm just simply stipulating that agape love requires genuine free will, not just the appearance of free will. And so in the book, in the article, I defend the existence of free will, at least, as you see in the bottom point there, as sufficient for purposes of agape love. So that's theological premise number 2. I want to ask a question at this point. If God is concerned for agape love, then what physical conditions are needed in creation for agape love capability? So God is concerned for agape love, so there's got to be physical conditions that make that possible. So what are those physical conditions? Well, one at least is the neurological capacity for free will, as that capacity to choose, to make choices, intentional choices of actions and relationships, of self-sacrificial, self-giving. And just as an aside, if you're interested in these issues of free will and neuroscience, I've found particularly helpful Peter C's work in his book, The Neural Basis of Free Will, where he argues the neural capacity for free will is a product of the molecular randomness of synaptic thermal noise. You'll see that was published a few years ago, 6 years ago in 2015. I've been in email correspondence with him since, and he's continued to develop this theory. And since then, others, particularly a group of Australian researchers, but others have also developed this kind of direction of the neural basis of free will. But that's an aside for those interested. Let me come to theological premise number 3. Genuine free will entails that God's method of creating is non-determinist. Again, behind each of these theological premises, there's a whole world of theological debate through history. So I'm not going to get into those right now. We can later if you wish. For now, I'm just going to stipulate the premises that I'm bringing to this model. And so here's premise number 3. Genuine free will entails that God's method of creating is non-determinist. So with these premises in the background here, we can provide an answer, a preliminary answer to the purpose problem. On the AMR account, God's purpose in creation was to bring about the existence not specifically of Homo sapiens, nor even specifically of hominins, but rather of agape-capable beings in relationships of agape love with God and with others. And I'm just going to read that again, because this is critical. I'm just going to this time read the bold parts. God's purpose in creation was to bring about the existence of agape-capable beings in relationships of agape love with God and with others. I love this quote from Carl Sagan. Don't know how many of you have ever read any of his work. Famous science fiction writer, died a few years ago. If you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. Well, true. But on the AMR count, I think that God's intentions were more profound than baking an apple pie. God didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm in the mood for an apple pie. I think I'm going to create the universe. On the AMR account, God's purpose was more than profound than that. Here's a the AMR revision of Sagan. If you want to make agape-capable beings from scratch, you must first invent the universe, which is precisely what God has done. So that's a quick overview of the purpose problem. This now brings us to the method problem. If that's God's intention, is to bring about the creation of agape-capable beings to be in agape relationship with God and with others, then how does God go about bringing that about? In other words, what sort of universe could achieve this purpose of making agape-capable beings from scratch? That is what was God's method for bringing about the existence of such beings. Well, there's some definite possibilities, conceptual possibilities. For instance, this phrase de novo. God could have used a de novo creation process. In other words, what that means is everything is brought about like that, completely out of the blue, new. There's no development. Everything, as we experience it, is brought into being as it is in its current state. Now, that is actually what is presented in Genesis chapter 1. The problem is, and here's where the issue arises for us, is this does not fit the scientific evidence available today. And so this is where a lot of the discussion around faith and science comes about, because what we see described, at least at a literal level, as we read the biblical text, the Genesis text, does not fit with the scientific evidence available today. And so that's part of the problem that the AMR account is going to try to resolve. So if that does not fit with the scientific evidence available today, what does? Because what we've got to fit into the picture of God's work is the following sorts of things that we observe in the universe. For instance, we observe, from science today, we observe massively large numbers, stars, billions and billions of stars, neurons, 85 billion neurons in the human brain, base pairs in DNA, etc. Those massively large numbers. Why did God create with everything with massively large numbers? Why didn't God create a universe with 5 galaxies or 2 suns, or brains with 6 neurons or 2 base pairs in DNA? What we have instead is massively large numbers. And what I want to argue is that's not just accidental or incidental. God had a strategic purpose for massively large numbers. We also observe genuine randomness. That's controversial. Certain Christian traditions will say there is no actual genuine randomness. So, for instance, there's a Christian philosopher, Paul Helm, who argues that actually God knows and controls the motions of every molecule. So, in which case, if that's the theological position one takes, then there's no genuine randomness. There's only the appearance of randomness, but it's not genuine. And that is an ancient theological tradition within Christian faith. But from science, what we see is genuine randomness. Probabilistic or non-determinist physics. Entropy-defying self-organization with emergent increasing complexity. Evolution. Evolutionary convergence, or underneath that, the principle of multiple realizability, which we'll come to again later, and the statistical possibility of life elsewhere in the universe. So here's theological premise number 4. These features of creation should be seen not just as intriguing, accidental side effects of God's creativity, but rather as essential elements of God's creative design strategy. So if they're essential elements, then how do they serve that purpose? Let me talk for a moment about convergence or multiple realizability. Multiple realizability is the principle that many emergent routes or paths to a particular outcome, evolutionary outcome, are possible. So what does that mean? For example, let me give you some examples. There are there are countless examples in nature of convergence. So here I'm just going to give a couple examples. One is intelligence. So larger mammals, corvids, which are crows and jays, and cephalopods, which are octopi and squid, all have evolved high levels of intelligence. And what's particularly important here is that they've done this with very different brain structures and very different neural processes, including different types of neurons. But all of these different brain structures and neural processes are convergently capable of producing intelligence. And we can go on to define what intelligence means there, but it means, for instance, being able to see cause and effect, manipulate objects in their environment around them to bring about causes and effects, and to count. There's a lot to project, to anticipate and predict. There's lots of different ways that intelligence is measured, but this range of animals produces intelligence by very different brain structures and neural processes. So what? So that's very interesting. Well, this brings us to my Cosmic Agape Hypothesis. The multiple-realizability principle, combined with the possibility, even probability, of life occurring elsewhere in the universe, leads us to hypothesize that agape-capability is cosmically convergent. In other words, if intelligent life can arise elsewhere in the universe, so too can agape-capable life. In other words, God has designed and created the universe as a system that provides many possible locations and therefore many possible evolutionary routes to agape-capability. So let me bring some of these pieces together. How these various features of creation, that list I just went through, can fit as essential elements into God's design strategy method. On the AMR view, the best collective fit of all these features of the universe is into a system whereby God's intention is for the universe to produce agape-capable beings. That is, God intentionally built the initial conditions of the universe in such a way that these features are necessary features. I reversed those words there. These are necessary features to the natural processes of the universe, so as to probabilistically bring about, with very high probability, the existence of agape-capable beings through many, perhaps countless, possible biochemical emergent routes. That is a mouthful, and so I'm going to read that again. Give us a chance to kind of absorb all that together. So, on the AMR view, the best collective fit of all these features of the universe that I mentioned earlier, from massively large numbers to convergence, to genuine randomness, and so forth, and probabilistic physics, etc. The best fit of all these features of the universe is into a system whereby God's intention is for the universe to produce agape-capable beings. That is, God intentionally built the initial conditions of the universe in such a way that these features are necessary to the natural processes of the universe, so as to probabilistically bring about, with very high probability, the existence of agape-capable beings through many possible biochemical emergent routes. Let's look at this another way. For God to non-deterministically predict that agape-capable beings would come about with very high probability, what features would God need to build into the system from its launch? So now we're kind of looking at the same question from a flip side to get just a different perspective on this. So let me just go back again. For God to non-deterministically predict that agape-capable beings would indeed come about with very high probability, what features would God need to build into the system from its launch? Well, for predictability, God would need to build order into the system. For emergence, that is, for self-organizing complexification, God would need to build in what we call non-equilibrium thermodynamics. For the very high probability element, massively large numbers. There's where those massively large numbers come in to build in very high probability. And for non-determinism, to build in the non-determinism element into creation. Bring this about this, God we'd need indeterminism at the quantum scale and genuine randomness, e.g. thermal noise, at the macro scale. Let me just say a little more about massively large numbers, because I think their importance is overlooked. Through the phenomenon of massively large numbers, there can be a high probability on a universal scale that low probability biological events on a local scale will be repeatedly achieved across the universe with sufficient time. This is basically the basis of astrobiology. In a sense, I'm not saying anything particularly new. NASA has a whole astrobiology program. A member of ASA, Stephen Freeland, is very involved in that. And so I'm merely highlighting there a well-known principle. Let me continue. On any bioniche, which is a term I use for a life-supporting planet or moon, the evolutionary trail to agape-capability will inevitably include mass extinctions, genetic dead ends, genetic bottlenecks. That's just the way evolution works. Following extinctions, dead ends, or bottlenecks, this massively large numbers approach by God enables agape-producing processes to get going again along other evolutionary routes, along many possible evolutionary routes or paths. Which leads us to the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe. We may be surprised when we find other agape-capable or proto-agape-capable beings elsewhere in our universe. But such a situation will essentially be no different than those many occasions over the past 5,000 years of human history when explorers, traders, or warriors have been surprised to discover some previously unknown people group living on the far side of some distant mountain range or body of water or desert. Oh, we're not the only ones here after all. I think that can happen just as much at a cosmic scale as it can on an earthly scale. Let me give a summary so far. This is part A of my summary of the Agape Many Roots account. So here we go. God created the universe to provide the space and conditions for the emergence of habitable bioniches, planets or moons, in which agape-capable beings would, with enough time, namely billions of years, emerge through multiple possible evolutionary routes to live in agape-love relations with God and with others. Earth is one such emergent bioniche, and Homo sapiens are an instance of such emergent agape-capable beings. So let me pause there for a moment just to kind of give us a chance to absorb all that. So Earth is one such emergent bioniche, and Homo sapiens are an instance of such emergent agape-capable beings. Well then, okay, that's the physical side. What about the God side of this? So how fine-grained or coarse-grained need God's non-determinist prediction be that agape-capable beings would emerge from this system? Okay, this is a probabilistic system. How precise does God's prediction have to be that agape-capable beings will emerge? And some would ask, does that compromise God's sovereignty, that this is a probability system? No, it doesn't, for reasons we can discuss later. But let me bring us now to the part B of the AMR account. So let's begin again, pulling these various threads together. The first part here should look familiar by now. God designed the initial conditions of the universe such that God foreknew that many possible routes could come about in the universe to provide agapic neurophysiological capabilities, and that one or more of these would actually come about through very high probability over sufficient time without needing to predict which actual routes would come about. So that's part B. And so now I'm going to bring everything together, give the full account. And this should start sounding very familiar by now with all these threads coming together. God created the universes, if there are universes. So just as an aside, one of the advantages of this proposal is, though I am personally not persuaded by multiverse arguments, nonetheless, many, shall we say, new atheists or atheists use multiverse arguments against theism. What my account here does is it accommodates multiverses. And so multiverses cannot be used as an argument against theism on this account. So it's just another advantage of the AMR account. So God created the universe to provide the space and conditions for the emergence of habitable bioniches in which agape-capable beings would emerge to live in agape-love relations with God and with others. Through God's creation of the initial conditions of the universe, God foreknew that many possible biochemical routes could come about to converge on agape-love capabilities, and that one or more of these would actually come about through very high probability over sufficient time, without God needing to predict which actual routes would come about. One actual route which has come about has been the emergence of Homo sapiens and other hominins on a bio-niche known as Earth. The loving designer creator of the universe has come to these inhabitants in their own form as Homo sapien himself, in Emmanuel, Jesus of Nazareth, with this message for their fullest existence. Love God and love others with agape love, especially those who are vulnerable, as well as strangers and enemies. So let me move to my conclusion. I want to talk about interpreting the universe, because this proposal allows us to interpret the universe in a particularly, I think, helpful way. So commonly out there in much of the atheist literature today are claims that the universe is self-generating and that therefore we don't need God, or therefore God does not exist. These sorts of claims that the earth is self-generating are not scientific explanations, even though they are often described by the proponents as scientific explanations. They are not. They are interpretations. Peter Bussey is a member of the ASA, but he happens to be an emeritus professor of astrophysics at University of Glasgow. And he has written recently a book published by University Press that addresses these kind of issues more deeply. So if you're interested in that, you can take a look for Peter Bussey, University Press. Secondly, claims that the universe has no meaning, no inherent value or purpose are also not scientific claims, but interpretations. And so again, you'll find in the anti-theism literature today, not only the claim that the universe is self-generating, but the universe has no meaning. And as Christians, we want to push back pretty strongly against this. And the AMR account provides us a basis by which to do that. and because those claims are interpretations, not scientific claims. On the AMR count, we can provide the following interpretations of the meaning of the universe. And so I propose actually two levels of meaning. The first level meaning is simply more popular language than the second level meaning. So first level meaning is of the universe is this, that the universe is a birthing space, a nursery, and a home for agape-capable beings in freely chosen agape-love relationships with God and with others. Then the second level meaning, which is simply incorporates more of the scientific language. On the second level meaning, the universe is God's great freedom system with order, probability, randomness, and regularities built into the physics and chemistry of the system all the way up, from the Big Bang to big brains, in order to bring about the emergence of agape-capable beings in those agape-love relationships. This freedom system, okay, now here, let me just see I usually don't include this, but since I've happened to accidentally scroll along to this slide, I will conclude with this slide and the next, because here we actually get into the implications of this for how we live. So this freedom system design sets up a fundamental choice between two types of freedom: autonomous freedom, living for ourselves, or agapic freedom, living our lives for God and for others. Autonomous freedom has become Western society's default view of freedom, but God invites humanity to agapic freedom in Christ. And so I will conclude with this slide here, Galatians 5, the 5:1. The NIV says, "For freedom, Christ set us free." The AMR version, refining that from autonomous freedom and for agapic freedom, Christ has set us free. And that is my presentation for this evening. Over to you, Nyasha.
Thank you so much for an engaging talk. It was really interesting listening and learning from you this evening. And I look forward to seeing you all at our future events, and keep a lookout on your email for updates. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Good night, all.